He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency forever. What's happening? I guess today, unable to shout out the chat, there is no chat. And I don't know that there's going to be a live chat, although perhaps there will be, and certainly at various times. Benton here will probably forget to turn it off, as I'm now, manually creating these streams within YouTube, learning that process. It's a tad different. StreamYard is certainly way more convenient in those regards. But shout out to the replay crew. Shout out to the listeners, right? And what I had noticed in the last couple of weeks of streams was maybe a greeting or two. Uncle Rick, Joe Moore, greeting me. Perhaps a Denise Winterbottom, I think, is that her handle, swinging through. Although I looked at the analytics for the channel, we're now 100% male for the last 28 days. And which is kind of funny because there was a time when it was 40% female and looking like a possibility of a 50-50. And, that ride has ended. I have my own thoughts and my own opinions about why the ladies chose to take their exit. But, I don't know that that's anything to discuss right now. And what is the topic? I've already forgotten the topic of the stream. Guess I will go to one of my two backup phones and see what is the stream called? Where are we at here? Ah, yes, lack of individual attainment fuels predatory systems. And the Royal We contends that what is going on within this, vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, taking it as it presents itself, which is, that's a necessity, I would argue, in order to maintain, what may be remaining of one's sanity. There needs to be some level of taking it as it, taking reality as it presents itself. But then again, the waking dream, surrealistic, unreal elements are certainly ever present, as they must be. But to me, this is one of the major keys, and it's not been identified that I can tell. So as I'm, looking at the feed on YouTube, the algorithm, the type of videos that are being pushed, although I would argue that the push is probably just to not hold back, right? I think the algorithm works more in it retards, and then it will remove whatever mechanisms hold the videos back, and then, sort of let nature take its course at that level. Or that nature, probably not the correct term. And, I'm seeing what are ostensibly grown men now in their cars on YouTube. This, historically, this has been more of a TikTok female phenomenon, the emotionalism talking into their phone emotionally. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I've certainly engaged in such behavior, not the TikTok and such, but the becoming emotional in the comments or in the content rather. But this was, some, I don't know, maybe 35 years old fella in his car, said he had a PhD, you know, not a medical doctor, but some sort of, again, following what the system has said to do, the conventional wisdom, the word of mouthing of everything. Oh, well, go get your education, and then your path will open up. And then, so why is the person told that? It's because, the young person maybe already in college or college age, the fear, the uncertainty. I remember the fear and uncertainty and disorientation and just worry about, how am I going to earn a living? Although that, I understood I could work, but it's, what does the future hold, the career path, what to get into. And then, I myself went to university, although it's a little different case there, um, much different case than nowadays. So, especially as excessively emotional as this fellow was in his car, he would be the type to be talking to his friends and family and his associates, openly discussing, and wanting to know, well, what are they doing? Right. Like, some version of, well, he would tell them, well, I can't be the only one that's worried about what to do. And then also asking the older folks what to do. And it's, some version of go get your education. And then, more or less, American life opens up at the level of home ownership, retirement, all of the trappings of the modern life that in some ways it seems like folks of a certain social class, beyond what would be considered the dregs, at the bottom, or the just blue collar working class, the people that intellectually or have the ability to go to college, or just are dumb enough not to go to college at times. Um, and again, to me, that's a dismissive, to answer in that way is like a dismissive word of mouth or conventional wisdom. Well, yeah, just of course, go to college, get the education. And nothing said of connections, right? Nothing said of, um, careful planning. Who is there to guide this process? Who is there to ensure that the right school will accept the person? Who's there to accept, to guide the education process? Because this is what actual wealthy people and the people who are plugged into the networks of the wealthy people, the so-called elites, and the people who work for the elites. And my conclusion is that most of who, us proletariat, right, us proles refer to as the elite or the ruling class, that's actually the people who administrate various systems of on behalf of the actual wealthy and elite, if that makes sense. They are seemingly, at a higher level, always insulated from whatever's going on here, if that makes sense. But this, back to the fellow crying in his car, just blubbering, eventually because of, probably going to be sleeping in his car soon. And now it's, and I understand, and I want to make it clear that as I speak this way about what's going on, presumably through videos and through the algorithm and through, social media propagation, that the royal we is certainly aware of the fact that these videos could be representative, or almost certainly are representative of something other than, but is it even appropriate to say what's actually happening, air quotes? Because when we look at the psychological enslavement, the mind control, ideas being packaged and then sent through push notification to people who are no longer discreetly processing data for themselves, um, this is a big part of the plight of the individual. So your broadcaster here, is certainly aware um, that there's, but again, your broadcaster is also recognizing the waking dream surrealistic, unreal elements, which are always present. So I think sometimes my serious manner and how seriously I can come across and how dense and concretely I seem to be taking the topic, I'm always, the royal we's always allowing for the possibility of fuckery, especially with respect to these platforms, right? And I want to be clear that when most of you got your first, proper smartphones and were, began accessing the internet every day. So there was if you look at human history or recent American history with respect to the internet, um, there was a period of time, many years, where the average person simply was not accessing the internet on a daily basis unless their job required it, or they were into that at the level of a hobby, or they discovered it in some way and uh, gained the technical knowledge, right? Gained the technical knowledge to, do things that were beyond just web browsing, because this would be pre-streaming, lest we forget. Uh, this would be pre-YouTube, pre-streaming video. And then, gradually more and more people were, accessing the internet more and more regularly, education, school, then whatever their hobbies or interests are, well, go to a web page for a website for one of their interests. And then with the advent of the smartphone, and as it was adopted and more of the public was utilizing smartphones, then here came the apps. And then that was the rise of social media, although, Facebook to some extent, even before that, of course, that was, MySpace, Facebook, more of a web browser based thing, for quite a period of time. So there's going to be exceptions to some of what I'm asserting. But what I'm saying is, if we identify the early time period of, let's say, 2008, 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, when that was the beginning, going from memory, of the general public beginning to access the internet every single day, multiple times a day, the general public. And, my contention is still that if it was desktop computers and laptop computers in the home primarily, the bulk of the populace was never going to be daily, multiple times a day internet users. It was never going to happen. It was, in fact, the smartphone. So I think it's very important to recognize that when 2008, 2009, 2010, the rise of the smartphone, that your broadcaster had effectively been on the internet every single day for about 14 or more years at that point. That's very important. Because I think it's very difficult for folks to relate to that, especially when I looked at the age demographics. It's mostly folks near my age at this point. We used to have a decent proportion of folks, beyond my own age group. I think I'm in the 45 to, I forget how it breaks down on YouTube, but I'd have to go back and look. We've got a little bit in the 35 to 45, I think. But then it's mostly people, fairly close to my age, the audience at this point. And it's not to disparage anyone. It's not an insult. It's a difference. Okay. And so when people hear me speak a certain type of way about the algorithm is doing this and this fellow's blubbering in his car, I'm not placing, the royal we places the proper amount of significance on that. And this is a difference in Benton's brain that's different from, the boomers and Gen X, which is, same fucking thing on some level, is that, yes, I myself will at times kind of fall for some bullshit, maybe a deep fake, or maybe not. I may not recognize as readily and as quickly that something is just bullshit nonsense on the internet. But I do all of that at a far greater level than folks near my age. Like and just already trained to ignore the nonsense of the internet. And this is how early on Benton got trained to ignore the nonsense of the internet. And famously, I've given the example that I wanted an email account when I was in college, 94, 95, somewhere in there. And then I tracked down the Unix system administrator and called him on the phone. Was like, hey man, how about you make me one of those Unix shell accounts so I can, use the Unix server and all of this, and telnet in. I want my own account basically, and I want my own email account. And so to show you how far back this was, it was only a couple years after that each new student at orientation at the University of Arkansas was assigned an email address. Maybe there was a period of time when people chose to apply. Perhaps I was the first person to ever just be like, hey man, give me an email account. And it was so early days of email that they just gave me my last name at uark.edu. They didn't even allow for, well, there's probably more Benton somewhere. Right. This is how long ago this was. So back then it was the email involved a lot of these chain emails. Does anybody remember these like chain emails, or these emails that it would get forwarded emails, not chain emails, although that was also a thing, these forwarded emails. So years later, right, as my family members began to get, because my friends were all college students, and at some point, they knew not to send me forwarded emails, or perhaps some of them that were also early adopters of email were some of the people forwarding me emails. But by the time my actual family got on the internet, after about the 10th forwarded email, I said, hey, y'all can't forward me that stuff. I've seen every single thing you forward me. Years ago, I said, I've seen every single thing you forward me years ago. So the person talking to you that's been on the internet effectively every single day since back then, the naivete and the gullibility kicks in, but realistically, my brain is not, it lacks the ability to not account for these things. So please understand that not to brag, not to boast, but my overall grasp and understanding of the internet is far greater than, perhaps anyone in the so-called truth community. And that's not hyperbole. That's because, I was there very, very early, and it became a very strong interest of mine for a long time. I was very strongly, interested in the internet. And remember, in '94, computer nerd knowledge was required to access the internet. And I'm not talking about AOL or CompuServe. I never used either one. And I never used a BBS. I'm talking about the actual proper internet. And so these are important distinctions. So, when I see the fellow crying in his car, and this is also horrible, and I did everything I was supposed to do. Yeah, I understand that there's some level of fuckery, and there's also, he's probably actually being genuine, but he can't really be genuine because he's influenced by social media. He also, humans in general like and respond to attention. Even they say, well, I'm not attention seeking. Well, people respond to receiving attention. So either way, what's the difference? Stimulus response. The dopamine and the likes and the shares, and perhaps somebody trying to earn a side hustle of doing a YouTube channel. All of these things play in, and the royal we here is able to grasp all of that in the moment when necessary. So, and I realize the royal we realizes that was quite a long disclaimer, and thank you for hanging in for that. If anybody did, much appreciated. And thank you for tolerating the lack of a live chat, because following the events of the last 20 minutes or so of yesterday's live stream, where I looked back at the chat and it was one greeting, which is fine. Certainly don't require greetings. Joe Moore greeted me. And then at some point, one person who, I've had dealings with in the past made all of the other comments, and, and did some of those comments. I barely read them or glanced. I glanced just enough to recognize, oh, okay, being spiritually attacked from the live chat. And had already considered, well, why even have a live chat? It's serving little to no purpose. And then, okay, well, I guess its purpose is that I may be potentially spiritually attacked by a person I've seen interface with other content creators in a similar fashion, at least two different content creators. So when I see the pattern emerge, when I see, three different, somewhat popular, one very well, I'm less popular than the other two, but all three have enjoyed some version of popularity in the so-called truth community. And I see, this individual spiritually attacking me near the end of, well, whenever it happened, whenever I noticed the comments it was going to be the end of the stream, and then I allowed the spiritual attack to continue the stream for about another 20 minutes. And some of that was probably important to get off my chest, but then in the moment recognizing, part of the spiritual attack is to that I would improperly identify, and then that I would behave incorrectly, and sort of bring myself down, crabs in a bucket style with my own behavior. So as much as my behavior at the end of yesterday's stream was much more appropriate than what it would have been in years past, where I might have crashed out and gone off the reservation and, hooped and hollered and yelled and made a big fuss. My people where I'm from called it pitching a hissy fit, right? Which I like that expression. I always like that expression. And even a grown-ass man, if he was willing to accept his own wrongdoing or whatever, he might say, yeah, well, I pitched a hissy fit, although generally people would accuse somebody else of that. It's when a grown man, behaves in a way that's less than masculine, actually. So it's interesting. It's like an acknowledgement of to not do that. But the fellow crying in his car, his beard perfectly in place, perfect haircut, all of the trappings of modern society, late model automobile, good quality clothing, right? Putting forth a specific image, and then falling to absolute pieces inside. And that's, again, with Benton's own density here, it's hard to realize. But Benton never fooled by the outward presentment, the way people present themselves, not fooled by that. And then the recognition that and I'll tie this back in with the topic of the stream, how many, what percentage of individuals are just, it's a complete catastrophe. Their internal space is a complete and total catastrophe. I mean, off the charts levels of you name it, it's going on in their mental illness, right? And people say, what do you mean mental illness? Well, how are people on all of these psychological these psych meds rather? Isn't that some sort of a mental health diagnosis involved? And this, I've mentioned this DBDR fella. I think he's in his 20s still, maybe late 20s. And did I already forget why I brought him up? How silly of me. What was I talking about? People's catastrophic inner space. Phooey. Forgot why I brought him up. I do enjoy his videos very much. Openly speaking of the doom, and intelligently doing it in such a way that, he doesn't seem to be trying to turn it into a side hustle, which does free him up to speak a little more freely, perhaps, than a channel like Millennial Steam, which is also one of my favorite channels, but it's now the views, his subscribers are falling off, his views are falling off because of the almighty algorithm, and a channel like Millennial Steam, probably not realizing that what the algorithm demands is, hey, we just had 3 or 4 celebrity deaths. You better talk about them. You better make a video about them if you think you're going to keep hitting that algorithm. So now it's punishment for not catching the algorithm, right? The algorithm catches you and you fall down, right? Or more correctly, if the algorithm misses you and you fall down. But anyway, my apologies for the aborted tangent there. But, as people as the algorithms continue to push or to allow the propagation of these videos, bemoaning the plight of humanity here, right? Bemoaning the plight of humanity in the United States. To me, I see it all in the framework of powerlessness, because, and it actually, to me, proves that the system and the people that administrate the system are not able to fear the people. The people are powerless. Why would the system that is consolidated the vast majority of the power and never, and this was a key point mentioned for the very first time on yesterday's stream, there's never a new moment, just as the economy in each new moment makes rich people richer every moment into perpetuity, never failing to achieve its purpose. These systems in each new moment are consolidating ever more power. Over what? Power in what way? Power to control the populace. And what is necessary for the populace to be controlled and guided and operated as if by remote control individually within a corporate structure is the individual must, perhaps there is a period of time in the past when it was the dumbing down, right? And even the notion of it's all a distraction, well, that's an outdated notion. These people aren't focused in the first place. Why do already distracted, unfocused people need to be distracted further? Now, there's the political games where, oh, Donald Trump's in trouble because of the Epstein stuff. Oh, I wonder what conspiratorial sounding events are about to occur to distract the powerful masses from, demanding justice and all of these things. And the people have no power and thusly are incapable of demanding anything whatsoever. Now they can pitch a fit, right? They can pitch a fit like they're in the grocery store and that they want mommy to buy them a toy, and mommy's telling them no, right? And then finally, back in my day, when mommy's had enough, and the kid understands inherently that, well, mommy might be persuadable. Well, she finally says, hey, if you don't knock it off, I'm going to tell your father. And that chills the shit right out if a boy has a proper father. So now what happens, of course, for decades is that there's no proper father anywhere in the picture, and eventually the national religion being consumerism, and at some point, mom who actually wants her child to be, assuaged and contented and all of these things just relents and buys the toy or whatever. All right, this is how this operates. And also, mom doesn't want to have to go home to dad, who's got the family on a tight budget, and explain, well, what's this extra expenditure, right? Because my pops was the type to perhaps scrutinize a receipt, or at least be like, hey, where's that receipt? If only for record keeping and tax purposes, right? But there's a high chance of him taking a gander at that grocery receipt. Well, again, that was back to the days of maybe that populace was focused and dialed in and tapped in enough to need to be distracted. Not this one. There is no, what's the reason, right? What's the advantage to distracting an unfocused population that's barely able to focus in when it's even in their best interest, right? So some of these ideas are already becoming outdated. But to me, it's an escape valve. Like it's to vent the pressure. It's also a recognition through the algorithm of how many folks are going through all of this. But then what are they doing? They're walking around every day. Many of them in cities, right? What percentage of the American people live in an urban area? What percentage of the population? I don't know, 60%, just guessing, in an urban area. And their internal space is, disconnected, alienated, disenfranchised, right? And then, I've talked about the 80 to 85% of the populace is experiencing the present moment emotionally. And then I've noted, perhaps the neurodivergent types, the more, undiagnosed fake autistic types, such as myself, well, our entree into the present moment is thoughts and ideas, logic and reason. And not that either way is superior to the other, it's a difference, okay? But so these would also be, Benton here being one of the more hermetic or more preferring of solitude and being alone. And this is a true statement, whether folks choose to accept it or not. As an adult, I've never experienced feelings of loneliness, ever. There's never a time when Benton feels lonely. Don't even know what that is, honestly. Don't know what it is to feel lonely. I am my own. There's the I am. Let me back up. Scratch that. Benton is his own best company, although perhaps the I am would view it that way as well, being, the ultimate supreme authority and source of all life and creation, the what I am and what I'm one with, right? But perhaps not appropriate to speak for the entire thing. And again, the idea of individuation away from that force, or individuated from that force, only possible within a delusion. And I'm still waiting for that to be debunked. I'm waiting for somebody to play my content and then just pause it right here and say, well, actually, it's this other thing. See, because over time, and I understand I'm already sounding a little big-headed, a little arrogant. Well, yeah, that's the personality of your broadcaster. I hear it. Right? I'm not ignorant to these things. The royal we is not ignorant to these things. And I believe the audience understands the point being made here. And lacking a little concentration of my own now, I see. Although perhaps that's short-term memory. I don't know. Benton doesn't know. So the fellow blubbering in his car, there was a lot of mention of lack of connection and humans, this idea that humans are seeking connection. I'm not even sure I'm not convinced that's the case, right? I'm not convinced that the vast majority of humans individually in the United States are actively seeking to connect. I think it goes beyond that. I think that there's a large proportion of the populace that's not able to connect, right? Or that are most likely blocking themselves from being able to connect, right? And from even their own attempts at connection are so removed from what was once effortlessly performed, perhaps, such as when I was a lad, effortlessly making friends at school, effortlessly making friends everywhere that I went. In fact, the peak of Benton's social air quote success was when by junior year in college, by summer going into junior year of college, having 100 personal friends. And this had nothing to do with, oh, well, I know that because I counted them because they're on my Facebook. No, that was I was, regularly on a weekly basis interacting with about 100 friends. It's not an exaggeration. Now, some of them were more friend of a friend type stuff, but it was a friend of a friend type thing where if there was a reason for the two of us to go do some shit, or maybe two or three of us to go do some things, and we didn't necessarily hang out all the time, that was still just completely natural to call them up on the phone or to send them a page and get a call on the phone, not the cell phone, and say, hey, yeah, me and such are about to go do this thing. We thought you might want to come along, type shit, right? 100 people, right? And that, even for an undiagnosed fake autistic person, with some, always certainly would have had some social awkwardness, right? Although probably perhaps masked by being, taught and made to perform in various ways through the Jehovah's Witness cult that I never joined. My parents were a part of. And then also what I've noticed over time is that society at large has become way less tolerant of oddballs and strange people. And just, something that in one of my favorite books, Angela's Ashes, the writer referred to as he was known in the community as afflicted with the odd manner, right? So it was just normal and accepted. If they're talking about this guy and maybe somebody doesn't really know him or whatever, or just in passing, oh yeah, he's afflicted with the odd manner. And probably he knew it, right? It's just completely fine. It's normal. It's accepted. It's tolerated. And back to actual, what LARPs is autism. Well, what is autism? A collection of behaviors that are all within the normal range for humans, collected together and given a name. And oh, well, now because of medical coding and billing, well, now this is an affliction, or this is some sort of disease, right? This is something to be treated. Well, it's something to be made a business of. Well, thankfully, old Benton here came along before that was such a thing at the level of medical coding and billing, right? Now, if the people where I lived were willing to tolerate some sort of education campaign around what the fuck is autism and then were willing to take their kids to doctors and get diagnosed, probably it would have happened. Just wasn't a thing when I was a kid. Zero people diagnosed with autism. Uh, and get this, when they talk about, the possible links between autism and the mother being exposed rather to high levels of pollution, environmental pollution, the area I'm discussing includes such as the home I grew up in as a child, which is 5 miles as the crow flies from the National Centers for Toxicological Research. And in fact, I have memories of the city of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, draining Lake Pine Bluff because of pollutants in the water, right? Drain the whole fucking lake. It was a heavily polluted area. Okay, so the chance of zero children with autism there's no way, impossible, But I don't want to get off onto an autism rant necessarily. But this shows you, so part of what's up with all these. Why is the number of autistic people rising? Well, that's what medical coding and billing is looking for, right? And that's social media platforms, teaching everybody about these things, and and the mother perhaps in an attention-seeking way, well, maybe my baby's autistic, yeah, all of that. So back to the fellow blubbering. Well, there are folks, and I recognized this early on when I was socializing. Some folks can't go anywhere and do anything unless they bring somebody else. And meanwhile, Benton here, I've always just been able to go do my own shit if I felt like it. I never felt strange eating alone. I got into bowling for a while, and I would do it socially. But if I had the money and didn't have anything else to do, I might go bowl 10 games in a row by my motherfucking self in the middle of the daytime, right? And not think anything about it other than I like to bowl, and this is what I'm doing right now. And if anybody looked at me funny, who cares? Well, that's all gone for the most part. And now with the smartphone, everyone having up to the moment almost in real time access to their peer groups, right? Well, I wasn't on a smartphone with a peer group to tell me how strange and perhaps pathetic it was that I was in a bowling alley alone. Like, well, what are you doing there by yourself? But yeah, I don't know that anybody knew, right? And if I just mentioned it what'd you do today? Oh, I went bowling. Well, this was in college. We're, dudes with testosterone talking about chicks and sports. Like, who's going to be there to dive deeper into Benton said he went bowling, unless they had a specific reason to wonder who I bowled with. It wouldn't have even been a question. But then with the peer groups and the social media and the likes and the upvotes and the downvotes and the commentary, right? Well, the average person now, every single activity is to be played for social media. So the bowling would have been secondary, the desire to actually throw the ball at the pins just for fun, just fun for fun's sake, and maybe just my own competitive spirit of, and not probably by then not really being able to play basketball at any decent level, although perhaps, depending on when this was, passing the time, the idea of a pastime. Well, now that's all taken a backseat to how does this play on social media? And then with the peer groups, we have co-ed peer groups now. See, when I was in college, there were co-ed peer groups to some extent. Most of it was involved with who was dating who, and then who was the best friend. So if I have a girlfriend, and whoever I hang out with the most, whatever fella I'm hanging out with most regularly, maybe he's got a girlfriend, and then that's kind of a foursome at times, right? But then, maybe those two chicks develop a friendship. Maybe they're hanging out. So even if all four of us together, I'm talking to my buddy, she's talking to her friend, she's talking to the other chick, right? Well, now with social media, it's all, and then everybody kind of parties together when it's time to party, right? Bigger groups. So when I talk about this 100 personal friends and all of this, well, at some point, it's like 50 people or more in a big house, having a party or just socializing on the weekends. And I believe this is the life that folks seem to be romanticizing in some way, or the Gen Z or the Gen Alpha or, some of the millennials are realizing oh, well, we never actually participated in this. But there's enough people who are 50 years old like me, not necessarily telling them this, but, this is a part of the story and a part of the history, right? And so back to the idea of dumbing down the public or degenerating the public, to tie it in with the topic of the stream, in order to have individuals who will tolerate and acquiesce anything the system decides to do to them. And I mean anything. These people will put up with anything. There's no end to what Americans individually will put up with, from the corporations, the banks, the financial institutions, the government, that, again, Benito Mussolini's concept of the state, corporate fascism and all of this. So a lot of these videos in the algorithm seem to now be talking about just that now there's some FOMO perhaps on the part of some of the younger folks. And then also the younger folks within their own families and the people they work with, probably the old folks who, these back in my day types who are still attempting to live based on the old days, probably these very savvy, tapped in kids. And now, when I say kid, I'm not making fun of them. I'm calling myself an old fogey, really. But the kids, from my perspective, there is a version of, wow, that actually seems like it would be awesome. Yeah, well, it was, although we didn't necessarily recognize it as such. We were having fun, but then simultaneously dealing with, these existential matters of, or just what to do with our lives. I believe, it seems like even as there was arguably more opportunity back then and perhaps a less difficult path to just earning a living and being accepted and, going off into careers and climbing, stereotypical corporate ladders, outside of that, most folks were socializing and having a lot of fun. Talking into late teens, early 20s, right? And the university scene was a way to sort of extend that. And, that's what I got out of college. It wasn't a degree. It wasn't anything that I learned from that experience. I was already reading books for many, many years. I was already educating myself for many, many years. It was, for what it provided for Benton was the social, to be able to socialize and have a lot of fun. It was fun. And that's lacking nowadays, right? And, why is that? And I attach that to what the individual has allowed to be done to them. See? And when I look at what your average young person is willing to acquiesce to and just allow to happen, your average person, when I was 22, your average 20 to 22-year-old, there's a lot of things that they just simply it would have been a hard no. Like, absolutely not. We have this right, or we have this freedom, or it's up to us, and we say no. Whatever that may have been. I don't have any examples, but whereas now, and I've talked about for literal years now, conformity is the new non-conformity. So a big function of Gen X was this idea of non-conformity, and of course, a lot of that came out of the hippies and the 60s movement and into the 70s, and just sort of, kept going to some extent. The influence of the prior generation. So it's the removal of a lot of that it seems to me, would be present if the system itself was not able to psychologically control the populace, whereas in a vacuum, without the smartphones, without the pressures and societal expectations, and the co-ed peer groups is a big one too, because imagine a male in a co-ed peer group, where most of the fellas, again, in a vacuum, wouldn't even notice or wouldn't know to think, well, who did you go bowling with in the middle of the daytime? Well, now we got females, right? Now we got females, not that there's anything wrong with that, who are immediately going to go right to the social dynamics and also constantly looking for ammunition for social psychological warfare, right? Constantly seeking any little advantage or ammunition, such as how pathetically it could be portrayed that a person had chose to go bowling by themselves, because then it could be at the level of ridicule or mockery. It could be implied that, well, it's because no one would go bowling with him. Meanwhile, Benton wouldn't give a fuck if nobody wanted to go bowling with him, right? If for some insane reason Benton wanted to go bowling and felt like he had to have someone go with him, see, he would never feel that way, right? But if for some insane reason, you know, maybe Benton normally had a person or persons that would go bowling, and then just today, for whatever reason, the first two people just can't make it, and then I call the third person, and they're like, "Nah, man, I'm good." And then I'm like, "All right, I guess I'm heading out alone." And then if people found out, oh, well, Benton couldn't get anybody to go bowling with him, I wouldn't give a shit. I wouldn't give a fuck. Who cares? Who cares? Like, seriously. But that's just like how I am. And it does seem to me like things were more that way in the past. And it seems like people were less likely to choose to internalize a lot of these spiritual attacks. But then, of course, the psychological warfare was very real. Now, I would argue that the rise of the smartphone, especially with the social media aspects of having up to the moment access to peer groups, well, the way males socialize, we're not, there's not supposed to be constant female input into how males are socializing with one another. But then if we look at the idea of the war on testosterone, if we look at, this idea that most of the males are no longer getting the flood of testosterone in the womb, the strong mask, and then the public school systems for many years, because the teachers all go through the university system, which is leftist communist university systems. And as people push back on that, that's fine. There are exceptions. The overall theme of the people who teach at universities and the climate to be accepted at universities, it's all leftist communism. People can reject that all they want. That's fine. Yes, even in the South, even in various regions of the country, this is how it is, folks. And I can now see that the royal we is permitting ourselves to become slightly annoyed by the fact that people will defend the university system. So the same person who will be very critical of these leftist, professors and these leftist, the students with the pink, purple, and green hair. Blue hair is not the right term. When did folks forget that blue hair means old woman? When did we forget that? Blue hair is a pre-existing term that refers to an old person. Now blue hair means like a leftist communist person, young person. It's very strange. There's other colors than blue hair. There's green hair, there's orange hair, right? There's all these other colors. Why does it have to be the blue hair? That means an old person, but either way, old woman. But I digress. Ain't B types, right? That's a blue hair. But apparently that term now means something new or something different. So there's no need. And what is it? And now if a person really wants to grow and change and evolve as an individual, because I'm talking about it's the lack of progress individually that is at the root of many of these problems. Well, now we have something to look at. What is it within the person where they're to a knee-jerk reaction to begin to defend the motherfucking university system? Well, is it because they may have sent their children through the university system and they don't want to recognize the leftist communism in their own children? Or is it that perhaps they're going to send their children to university, or their children are going to become college age and perhaps choose to go to university? And some of these folks, they themselves went through the university, right? This is all very interesting to think about. So, the fact that my father, it wasn't that long after I stopped pretending to go to college that he was paying for, yeah. that he fucked off all his money anyway, thinking he was going to be a day trader for his career, right? And in fact, he's good at it, but uh, he didn't know himself. He did not understand the compulsive gambling aspect, and still doesn't. He's in denial, but that's not the point. The point is, yeah, it's great. It was great for me that he was willing to spend all that money and send me off to university. Certainly, yeah. Thanks, Dad. Appreciate you. And he tried to guilt trip me on that, and I just said, look, man, anybody dumb enough that couldn't realize I wasn't college material at that age, fuck them. And I meant him to his face. I was like, that's their fucking fault. Basically, like, hey man, that's your fault. I don't know why you think I'm going to take any of the blame for this, right? Which is kind of funny. What? The only thing I did wrong was not get a degree. Other than that, the blame lies with you, sir. But there's that old masculine accountability. So back to what I'm talking about with the men, masculine men, right? Masculine young men with testosterone. They're going to cultivate and guard their own male only spaces, right? Well, that's gone. Does that even exist anymore? So every single day of my life, high school, right, college, it's mostly socializing. Some of it was mixed and co-ed, right? Certainly, but then there was a lot of just the males together, right? And that's gone. That's gone from society. It's not allowed because again, how is it going to play on social media? And on social media, here's the broads to put their 2 cents in. And that's just how it is. So individuals, again, the system teaches to direct all efforts outwardly away from the power center or the sphere of influence, or where somebody actually has power to effectuate change, which is within themselves. Direct the efforts outwardly, right? So then now we have the fellow blubbering in his car because he's one of these people that can't go do anything on his own, and now he's disconnected, socially isolated, miserable, right? As are many of the folks that he would ostensibly be. That's my new favorite word, apparently. Ostensibly be, and I've known of it for a long time, certainly. Ostensibly be, interacting with and going to do things with. There's no longer 5 or 6 different people. There's no longer a large enough social group to where he might have a close friend who's available much of the time. And then when that person's not available, there's at least a second and a third person that are options. Because I've been observing this my whole life. There's certain folks, they don't go anywhere. They don't do anything without a tag along. Doesn't matter what it is. If they're going up the street to pick up the pizza they just ordered, somebody's coming, they're dragging somebody with them. And half the time it's somebody like me who's just like, yeah, sure, I don't give a fuck. I'll go with you. Who cares? Even if we don't know each other that much. These people are like, all right, well, I'm about to go get the pizza. Who, more or less like, who's coming along? And then we're just all looking at each other and like, fuck it. All right. Okay, I'll go. And, some of that is, not understanding my own, anthropological, sociological, I'm interested in these topics, just the study of humanity, and that's not what, I'm not, again, sociologically, just sort of, now I get to see how they drive. Like, I don't know that I was aware that that's what I was doing, but it's a curiosity, right? And just a willingness to participate in things and just look at the opportunities that are, they're still available to young people, but it's all now it's sort of sinister and weird and strange, and it's bastardized from what it used to be. And I chalk this up to this disconnection. People are now disconnected from what? From the healing, right? And whatever it does when people interact in the physical space, right? I've talked about, when 2 people come together and they have a back and forth conversation, the energy spheres overlap, there's an exchange of energy, and this is healing for both people in the majority of cases. Well, that's all pretty much gone and over with, and I don't need people, the fact that it's like, well, where I live, we do it the old way. Well, great. Why are you on here listening to me then? See, I'm going to go ahead and call some version of bullshit. Like, okay, then then I don't understand why the person would come here and listen to this, only to then reject, vast swaths of what's being asserted. That, to me, that's strange. That's odd. That's a bit of the odd manner, right? Why? I don't understand. Just what's the purpose of that, right? So now this fella, the fellow in his car, he's crying because he's lonely. He's crying because he's disconnected. He's crying because in the past, he wouldn't have been able to fully start sobbing because somebody would have been there, when he could have, this emotional fellow could have, they could already be talking it out. Now there's nobody there. And whoever would have been there is probably in their car on the other side of town. And maybe it's a woman, because this could have been a gay man. Who knows? Hard to tell these days, but could have been, possibly. And, so maybe he would have been tagging around with a woman, perhaps. And now she's in her car on the other side of town, and maybe she's working 3 jobs or whatever, and she's giving her own speed. She's delivering her own spiel into her phone, but she's doing it on TikTok, perhaps. Like, just the sickness, just the psychological sickness of what is being described just here, right? Just that aspect of society. This is sick. It's sick, right? And it brings me back to the idea that there's no end to what Americans will tolerate, right? If social interaction, if connection, if all of that is removed, if that leads to isolation, and all of these things, well, okay, we'll just go talk to our phone. Right. I mean, there's just no end to what people will adapt to and tolerate. There's not. And, there's what is the positive motivation? What is the positive motivation for folks to pull themselves up by their internal bootstraps, mind, body, and spirit, and to, figure out what's going on in their internal space, to put in the hard ass work over time to get their own house in order? Because until individuals do that, there's zero hope for fixing any of the problems. And as Mark Passios noted, and I only reference him because this is where I first heard the idea, the idea of MAGA, traditional family values, Christians, Trump supporters, they don't want to fix the system. They don't want to resolve the problems. They want to seize control of the government and have it do what they want it to do. Same thing with the so-called left wing. It's the same thing. That's not a true intention to make the world a so-called better place, which isn't even possible, because that would imply that it's a good place in the first place, or in the first instance, right? And then why haven't individuals developed their mind? Why have they not disciplined their mind to be able to track these details and to draw these distinctions in real time? Why is it Benton that's able to say, well, what do you mean make the world a better place? Does that not imply that the world is a good place? Is that what we're saying now? Because I thought it was evil and wicked and horrible. I thought that was the general consensus. Now it's make the world a better place. Now, if you're saying, perhaps to make it less nightmarish, perhaps, yeah, okay, then that seems achievable, perhaps. What's not achievable is to make it a better place, because it's not good to start with. So what is even being discussed? And most of the people that I would go out here on a daily basis and interact with, yeah, if I describe that to some of these intelligent I shouldn't call them intelligent, but it's a different type of person in a large city like Los Angeles or any other large city. There's just a greater access to people who at least would have the intellectual capacity to follow what I'm saying, right? But why aren't they themselves coming up with this? Why aren't they thinking that way? Why aren't they directing and honing their own thought processes? Well, they are, but they're allowing it to be done by the system. The system, they farmed all of that out externally to a system which does it in a way that suits the system's purposes. And symbiotically, if we look at everything as a corporate structure and a business, well, if this is a highly educated person tapped into a network, right, somewhat affluent family, right, in a big city, and they have the ability to earn $250,000 a year, which sounds like a lot of money, it's enough money to live in certain areas of Los Angeles and just enjoy what the neighborhood has to offer at the level of entertainment, food, and such. Sure, it's not, and to then save for retirement potentially. Yeah, $250,000 to live in a city and then to actually enjoy what America was purported to be in the past, right? To enjoy a certain lifestyle. It's now $250,000, folks. For real. That's what it is right now. That's what's required to just more or less to meet the metrics, to potentially own a home at some point, right? To save for retirement, to have an emergency fund, to properly manage one's finances while not necessarily being that concerned with how they to have a disposable income, really, realistically, to just have a disposable income. 150K as a single person in a large city, no, they're not going to have much of a disposable income. They're going to spend on credit cards, and they're going to rack up consumer debt just in order to do things that are considered normal in society. It's now considered normal in society to order DoorDash or to have food delivered. And if it's $40 for a meal, it's $40 for a meal. That's just what it costs to have the Uber Eats delivered or whatever, in a big city. They're talking about now one burrito in Seattle. It's like with a tip, it's like almost $40. Like, it's a real thing, And some of that is just that, Uber has to keep adding fees to the delivery, right? They keep having to raise how much it costs to deliver because the Uber drivers won't deliver because it's like, yeah, we're not delivering to downtown Seattle, and there's people wandering around with machetes and in Portland, they had a homeless man went on a rampage for 3 straight days. Went on a rampage before the cops finally were able to corral this dude. He was just in downtown, apparently, the whole time. So it's clearly being allowed to happen, and everybody can have their own opinion about why. Well, it always comes down to the internal space of the local people, what's going on within the local people. Again, if the peer groups are communists, and when we look at any, I'm not an expert on communism, but when we look at communist revolutions, that seems to involve a period of lawlessness and just an emptying of the jails and criminals being allowed to run free. So from that perspective, America's certainly undergoing some version of a communist revolution. Now, tongue in cheek, but it's certainly some version of that. But it's not across the board necessarily. Well, what do we see when people want to talk about, well, L.A., who would want to go there? L.A.'s coming to y'all whether you like it or not, folks. Hollywood's coming for you whether you like it or not, because what influences historically all of the entertainment, the culture, this idea that Arkansas was 10 years behind California when I was a kid, and we were even aware of it, although it was actually closer to 20 years. That's all coming out of Southern California. So, this idea of who in their right mind would go to LA, who in their right mind would let LA come to them? See, that's where the individual responsibility and ownership comes in. Oh, okay, well, people who would never set foot in the city limits of Los Angeles will happily invite Los Angeles into their homes. So what's the fucking difference? Or into their child's lives through a smartphone. And now, of course, the articles are coming out and acknowledging something that would have been known years ago, which is, to give a child a smartphone below the age of 13, it's off the charts. Mental illness, it's off the charts, thoughts of harming themselves, of course. Well, of course it is. How could it not be? This is just the way things are. And again, that's yet another thing that Americans are going to go along with and tolerate, because that's what Americans do. Oh, you mean it's bad to give my 7-year-old an iPhone? Well, what does the peer group have to say about that? Well, the peer group says, yeah, all of our 7-year-olds have iPhones. So, okay, well, I'm not going to be the one, is that person really going to be the one person in the peer group that's going to have the courage to say, well, not my kid. Now, maybe they'll last a month, 2 months, 6. At some point, they're just going to say, oh, fuck it. Here's the iPhone. Right. Or it's going to be some version of, well, they go stay with their daddy on the weekend and he's given them an iPhone. Right. And I've heard these family court cases where it's like they get into arguments sometimes because maybe there's actually a halfway strong dad. He doesn't want the young kid having a phone. But then it's mama's gave him a phone. And then dad is having to negotiate with the judge and the mom and the lawyers in court. And the judge is having to say, listen, if dad has custody for the weekend and dad doesn't want the kid to have the phone, dad is within his rights to just seize the phone when the kid walks through the door or when the kid gets picked up and say, I'll give this back to you at the end of the weekend. right? And that's how lost society is. That you got, and I've heard the court cases. You got mothers in family court trying to get a judge to tell their ex-husband or ex, their baby daddy that he can't take the fucking iPhone away from the 10-year-old, right? Well, again, not that my day was better. Back in my day, that never would have happened because my big, strong, terrifying father would not have let other people have anything to say about what went on in his family. It just simply was not allowed. Yet another function of the father, that in order to dumb down and degenerate individuals within society, well, we got to get him out of the picture, see, right? We got to get him out of the picture. And that's happened. Now, people say, oh, well, not where I live. Great. Nobody lives where you live, and nobody's coming to live there. So what's the fucking difference? Y'all are a drop in the bucket. Who cares? Who cares about your dying ways that represent a drop in the... Nobody cares. Because whoever results from your lineage is going to be fully blessed, cursed into this system, whether you like it or not. So yeah, okay, well, these people are from, so-called conservative areas. Are they not going to send their children off to leftist communist universities? Right? So how are the children going to behave? Are they going to behave based on the leftist communist programming, and they're expected to go into a corporate structure, and they're going to have to not be a bunch of oddball weirdos in the corporate structure just to earn a living, right? But they're still going to live based on the old ways? No. Some of them are going to never leave the county, right? And some of them are still going to live the backwards ways of the people who never leave the county. That's always been the case. I'm from one of those places. I'm from a place where a sizable portion of the populace never leaves the motherfucking county, right? I'm from one of these areas. I just happen to be from a city, right? A small city in one of those counties, right? And to this day, my uncle, who moved out to the county like 35 years ago, right? He told me, when we still had a decent rapport, he said, I've lived out here for 30 years. He said, and these people will never fully accept me simply because I'm from their perspective, I'm from the city. And it's the city that was 55,000 people, and it's in the same fucking county, right? And at some point, all the people in the county, eventually they have to go into this city, and they hate it, right? And he said, yeah, these people will never fully... I'll never be one of them just because I grew up in the fucking city limits, right? And I understand that those dynamics still exist. I grew up with those dynamics. I get it. And I understand I sound like someone who could be mistaken for, country folk. I'm not country folk, never have been. Not interested. Now, I've spent a lot of time, with country folk in country folk type environs, right? Again, back to the anthropological side of things, right? But as far as skin a buck and run a trot line, no. Never skinned a buck, never ran a trot line. Done some fishing. Haven't done any hunting. My father, also not a hunter, but he was a fisherman. So surprise, surprise, Benton doesn't hunt. His father, well, he would go squirrel hunting on occasion, but not that often. Rarely, but it did happen when I was a young boy. He knocked that the fuck off pretty quickly. But then, fishing was a regular activity. And then, I would like to fish. I enjoyed it. So that's, we would do that together to some extent, So some of this stuff is not unknown, but then what I see is the boomers and Gen X attempting to cling to the old ways as if that was some kind of life raft or life preserver. That can't save you or save anything, right? What's the benefit to trying to cling to the old ways when the individuals in society have allowed themselves to be degenerated to the point where they're no longer able to behave based on the old ways? Now, can these modern, ghoulish, psychopathic, consciously unaware folks, can they go out and go fishing with their father or whatever? Yeah, they can. They can still, in a sort of a zombie-like, hollow, vacuous fashion, again, the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, yeah, they can go out and perform these things. There's no soul to it, right? It's devoid of the substance that would have been there when my father took me fishing, right? And we sort of had to figure out how to get along with each other in a way, right? Because, yeah, I was willing to accept the authority and the discipline of my father, but old Benton here, once a certain age was reached, I had no problem whatsoever pushing back. Okay. No problem pushing back when necessary. I would pick my spots, but very, very strong-willed person from just out of the gate, right? So there was, some version of two males having to get along with each other to some extent. And then, why it wasn't, and I think my father would have preferred to have probably a grown man to go fishing with him. Even then, the social isolation for some folks, why was he even bringing me along in the first place? And in fact, he tried to turn me into his fishing buddy at a certain point. It's like, yeah, man, I'll go fishing with. It's like I wasn't into fishing overall. It's like, yeah, it's cool, but not on a regular basis. I had friends and a life back then. I had friends and a life. Who can say that nowadays? So yeah, some people are like, yeah, I have friends and a life. Or again, looking at the algorithms and what the phone is doing, are people keeping up the appearance of friends in a life that no longer exists because it's gone, never to return, as folks go more towards a Ready Player One situation. And movies are very helpful anchor points for these conversations. I see, when I look at society, and especially at the level of what individuals are doing, I see people at this point who would happily volunteer for the Ready Player One aspects. Like, yeah, and even myself walking around, and at some point I'm about to go get the eggs and all of this, at a certain point, it's like, if it were feasible to just stay in the car and have the shit brought to me, why wouldn't that be a thing? I could even conceivably have a tiny little trailer behind this car, and have just enough extra storage space for whatever little bit of items, and just shop the bare minimum, right? And more and more, what I'm seeing is the general public is they're paring all of that back, right? They're doing the minimum in a lot of ways, whereas when I was a younger person, everything was sort of it had the potential to be a fun activity, right? On some level, other than maybe what was obligatory, going to church, certain aspects of going to school. We even made school fun, most of us, right? That surely can't be the case. Is fun even tolerated in school, right? Or allowed without, now we got to get the parents involved, because especially the way the boys are behaving, right? Because when I was socialized, because almost every boy had a strong father, or at least a father who had to keep up the appearance of being strong, because again, all of these men were socialized in a hyper masculine environment. So even if they themselves were a little more sensitive, and they still had to be able to plausibly come across as the tyrannical, fucking terrifying father, and had to be able to stand up to whatever needed to be stood up to, such as, hey teacher, like, it's really none of your fucking business how my boy chooses to socialize with the other kids, right? So it wouldn't have ever been an issue. Whereas I just imagine, with no evidence, but I suspect, which means suspicion means without evidence, that's what's going on now. It's a lot of micromanagement and a lot of scrutiny of the social interactions of the youth. Again, communism. This is all communism. And it's not a thing that, oh no, America, better watch out, it might become communist. No, there's aspects of communism are absolutely on display in American society, and have been and continue to be. 100%. Right? So you don't have to worry about, we would never go to the communist left coast. It's going to come to you, partner. So what's the difference? What's the motherfucking difference? It's going to come to you. Meanwhile, If you went to it, at least you might have some understanding of the enemy, or something that you might view as your enemy. And MAGA certainly views that as their enemy. Well, Benton here doesn't view that as his enemy. He views what this place is has made an enemy of what Benton is, what I am. This place makes an enemy of what I am, right? And that's why it exists. Okay. But then if that could represent enemy, right? If leftist communists could represent an enemy, well, I know the motherfucking enemy. I've laid eyes on them. I've talked to them. Same thing with BLM. Same thing with Antifa, right? And isn't that part of what America was supposed to be about? Isn't that part of the mythos? And it probably never actually existed, but it's just sort of under, and of course it's not freedom, but, why wouldn't a person who's more right-leaning want to at least see things from the perspective of a person who's left-leaning? Well, those are threatening ideas. Well, but what is being threatened? It's the psychological control that's threatened. It's Moloch's machine that's threatened. If Moloch's machine puts all this time, effort, and energy towards indoctrination and divide and conquer, well, it's Moloch's machine that's going to be incentivized to keep the right wing from studying and getting to know the left wing, and vice versa. And then perhaps those two groups would find common ground in ways. Well, that's certain. If the system has put a lot of effort into dividing those groups, it's certainly not going to allow them to come together, right? And then again, back to the peer groups, MAGA, with up to the moment access to their co-ed peer groups, well, they can't be the one to be the first person to say, well, you know what, I'm just going to go see what these commies are all about. I'm going to go talk. And not to make a social media got you video. I mean, to just go maybe talk to a few, figure out who might be willing to go have a cup of coffee and just go have a fucking conversation for its own purposes. And, just, again, not to put on social media, not to talk about later, right? Just to have a human interaction. Well, that's over with. How much no strings attached, just sort of because we're human beings and human beings are predisposed to maybe have certain types of interactions. Whatever happened to just sort of innocently doing a thing because, again, of its own merits? It's all over with. Again, vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, the transactional nature of society, evolving or devolving or progressing or regressing, depending on the perspective, to this point where it's like, okay, well, but what's the purpose of the interaction? Meaning, what is being transacted? Well, in the past, it was one human being and another human being, and they both, on a human level, responded and, enjoyed the interaction and got something out of it. And then some version of okay, now we go our separate ways, and they haven't changed their mind about their views. I haven't changed my mind, but now I have some insight into why do they think the way they do? Why do they approach these issues the way they do? Okay. And then that could be viewed as a threat to the system, and in its consolidations of power, and in the corporate structure where the big boys say competition is a sin, well, the big boys are always competing against any little fella who might potentially grow and get bigger and then gain some measure of power, right? And then have a seat at the table within the system. See, the system is always going to prevent that from happening if the system is able to, unless to allow it to grow, right, would benefit the system. So the algorithm pushing certain types of videos, well, that must be to the benefit of the system. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening. See, that's a piece of technology, right? This is called using one's mind, right? When Benton observes this, well, whatever the algorithm is perpetuating and pushing forward or allowing to propagate, that's what benefits the system, while what doesn't benefit the system will be held back, obviously, right? Clearly, this is the way the system operates and continues to operate, and it operates because of the refusal and or inability of the individuals who comprise the masses to pull themselves up within themselves by their own bootstraps, mind, body, and spirit. They simply refuse. Now, they will do those things if the system incentivizes them, and the system only incentivizes them in ways that benefit the system, and probably it won't represent actual progress, because remember, it was the system itself that has staged and managed and operated these processes of degenerating the individual within, or the individuals allowing themselves to be degenerated within themselves. And that's what this is. America is a populace of individuals that have acquiesced to their own degeneration, meaning they've permitted outside authorities, outside entities, outside structures, and outside phenomenon and thinking, right? Outside phenomena and thinking to degenerate them, because they're being operated by extension for the benefit of not them, for the benefit of systems. And the systems are taking full advantage of individuals' absolute refusal to bring themselves up to a higher level. And so collectively, the level at which Americans are now interacting with the external, right, with a degenerated internal space, they can only interact with the external space in a degenerated fashion. See? How can a being that's acquiesced to becoming degenerated, or degenerate is actually probably it's correct grammatically, but that's taken on a different meaning. But so people who have become degenerates, who've acquiesced to becoming degenerates in spite of the old ways, in spite of the succession of the ancestors in upholding and passing on the torch of the old ways. Well, this has come to pass, folks. Like it or not, this has come to pass. And these are bells that simply cannot be unrung, except if an individual decides to go within themselves where their power actually lies, and to courageously contend with whatever is there, come what may, and pull themselves up individually. That is, nobody or nothing can stop them except themselves, right? And for whatever reason, Benton here was able to tap into that early and often, for whatever fucking reason that is. Don't know. But somehow it was. And just, again, born into spiritual perfection, and just for whatever reason did not fall away from it quite as dramatically as others, right? And if you look at your average person these days, when they tell their biography, how much of it is involved in, running afoul of the law, incarcerations, drug addictions, right? Strife in the nuclear family, blended families, whatever traumatic childhood may have been survived, your average individual out here is more or less, especially again, middle America, certain social strata, certain social class. This is a fucking complete train wreck, just basket case, because remember, you can uphold and honor the old ways all you want. The ancestors within the last few generations, especially the country folk, well, they weren't opiate addicts, right? They weren't on Fent. Some of them was alcoholic, sure, but maybe some of them smoked pot, right? And then I understand Quaaludes and amphetamines, and America certainly has a history with drugs, but now it's like everybody has these stories, just about, and it's gotten so sick that I remember years ago being in downtown Little Rock, Arkansas, and in the River Market district, and there was an outdoor event, where these people had applied for a permit, and they were able to close off a public area, and that I would normally go there. Maybe there was an outlet where I could charge or whatever, or maybe there's I think there's bathrooms there actually, and I was still able to go to the bathroom. So I'm listening. So these people are giving this whole program where it's a bunch of drug addicts patting each other on the back for their so-called recovery, and I'm just watching all this like, well, you're not supposed to get hooked on drugs. So why is there a banquet being held to honor people for for falling into something they're not supposed to fall in the first place. See, that's how the ancestors would approach it. That's how my grandfather's generation would approach it. Well, hey, dummy, you weren't supposed to become an addict in the first place. You know, so do you think the few people who were falling into it and then recovered, would they go have a very public banquet where they, over a PA system, took turns taking the stage and just falling all over each other in effusive praise for managing to reverse a process they weren't supposed to fall into in the first place? Like, this is society, folks. This is society. This is what it is, And so, and when I look at Benton in 2025, part of my own, some of my outlets for socialization might be less just because, well, I've never been to jail. I've never been incarcerated. I've never, been a drug addict and have to go through treatment and all of this, right? Haven't been through the mental health system, right? How many people are now sort of, interacting on the basis of discussions of their own mental health and their own recovery or their own drug addiction, right? And all of these things. It's fucking sick and twisted, and again, indefensible. So when I imagine some of these middle America folks, however they're living, and I'm doing my best not to single out anybody or have them feel singled out if they're listening, how are they to cope with all of this, right? And then the idea of, okay, the fear of all this bad shit is happening in society. Well, sort of fleeing to, something a little more akin to how the ancestors lived in recent generations, as if that could save anybody, right? Building a time machine and attempting to live in the present as if it were the past. I see no mechanism that will save anybody, because that's why, or otherwise, why would the Amish have a thing called Rumspringa? Because you can raise your kids all you want in such an environment. At some point, they are going to discover and interact with the outside world. And then it's going to make them over in its image, most likely, also known as being sacrificed to Moloch. And they may, who knows, if they haven't been sacrificed by their own parents and their own community, they may very well willingly sacrifice themselves to Moloch's machine, simply to be able to have a peer group that they can get along with through their smartphone, and to have a place to go to work, right? And to maybe be able to earn that $250,000 to actually be able to have a living. Now, am I describing somebody that sounds like they're going to live in the country, or am I describing someone who sounds like they're going to live in the city? Meanwhile, even if they live in the country, they're probably remotely working and performing the functions of a city person. They're just doing it not in the city, as more and more people in the city are not coming out. They're staying in their fucking apartments. Now, where I'm at in Los Angeles, there's less people in the general area because, they're fearing being snatched off the streets. Meanwhile, it's America, which is supposedly, not only am I free, I'm more free than anybody's ever been in all of human history. And I'm walking around every day, and people are genuinely fearful that the motherfucking jack-booted oppressor thugs with their faces covered, wearing body armor, will appear out of nowhere and physically fucking seize them and throw them into a dungeon. Think about that. That's America, folks. And then I already see what will start coming out of people's mouths, which is, well, if they hadn't done this, and if they hadn't done that, if the Democrats hadn't done this, and if this hadn't happened, blah, 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 blah. Who cares? Who cares how it happened? It's happening. Does it fucking matter what caused it? Meanwhile, that's not even what caused it. That's what the system has put in the mind via the psychological programming and the mind control. That's all programmed into the individual for the individual to knee-jerk reaction and stimulus response and just start blurting things out without even thinking. Just, well, this is the this and it was the that. And if Biden hadn't done this and if the Democrats hadn't done that, again, who cares? The people tolerate whatever the government does. Why are we talking about where, the last 5 times the deck chairs on the Titanic were rearranged? Why are we discussing 3 arrangements of the Titanic deck chairs ago? Who cares? Right? Who cares? What does it matter? It doesn't. because that, again, that benefits the system. That's the psychological mechanisms of subverting what could actually be an honest, open conversation with people thinking for themselves about the issues. Well, the individuals, having been degenerated, they're not going to pull themselves up within themselves and get control of themselves and just say, okay, well, it's actually more important in this moment. It's more important to honestly and courageously look at all of this than it is to just revert to the psychological programming. Because guess what? I see the stimulus and response in my own mind. But as a person who's developed and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps within themselves, mind, body, and spirit, I have the ability to watch the mind control and the psychological programming, the stimulus response, and just watch it happen in my own mind and choose a different path. Most of you don't, right? And if I ain't talking to you, I ain't talking to you, okay? And Benton's not here to lead anybody to that. Benton's not here to make a business of teaching people how to do that. Benton is observing and reporting. Whatever y'all do with this or don't do with it, this is for entertainment purposes and perhaps, whatever else y'all find appropriate to do with. Okay. This ain't a movement, right? This is not a cause. This is not a group that's joinable. Hell, there's not even a live chat at this point, right? All comments are being held for review, because after ending the stream yesterday, here's 3 comments by the same person who was in the live chat, and I look down and here's where expert levels of skimming, right? From day one, for whatever reason, Benton has an inborn ability to skim written material. So I take one glance at the 3 comments. I'm like, okay, I'm not reading this. Why would I read this? Okay. Meanwhile, the person who presumably wrote it is free to email me, as they have been. They could have, if they really wanted me to know these things, why not just email me? Why is it being done publicly? See, so there's already a motive. There's already factors at play that don't, strictly speaking, involve me and that person's, what may have been going on with me and that individual person in the past. See, which is also the argument for, hey, why weren't all of our past conversations live streamed in the first place? We've had plenty of offline, meaning off-stream conversations, right? Why not have made content of all of that? Well, perhaps some of that was, I functioned as a good listener at times for somebody who was then able to get things off of their chest that they would not have wanted to be publicly known, perhaps, right? And that I wouldn't make publicly known. I'm not going to make public. It's nothing bad, it's nothing. There's nothing there. I'm just saying I'm not going to. Part of being told something in confidence is to understand that most likely it's not going to be repeated, right? Even if it's not something damaging or fearful, right? It's just things people don't want to talk about necessarily in most cases, but might need to discuss, might need to get somebody else's opinion on, especially so-called man-to-man, right? As that's less and less of a thing, as the more of the touchy-feely aspects intrude, right? Because, I've had to check my own father at the level of manhood. I've told my own father to his face that he was acting like a bitch. Hey, man, you're acting like a bitch. Knock it the fuck off. Because that's what it is, man. That's what it is. Now, I'm not necessarily going to do that with somebody that I don't know well enough to do that with, but I can still kind of hint around to it. My father's pretty dense. He needs to be told directly. But with other people, I can just sort of present it in a way where it's like, hey, you might want to look at this. Perhaps this is falling short of a certain standard, and vice versa. See, the other man can do that for me if we're on the same level. It's not a me doing that for that. We do it for each other, right? And Lord knows, my father was the one tasked with raising a male who eventually became a man who would just look another man in the eye and say, hey, man, you got to knock this the fuck off. Now, some of that was that was when I was first in my chronic illnesses, and we were collaborating. We were sharing resources and collaborating, and he had just moved into his apartment. And he was his behavior was fucking bizarre and bitch made. And I just had to say, hey, man, you're acting like a fucking bitch. Knock it off. And he knocked it the fuck off. Good. He should have thanked me, but that's okay. I don't need to be thanked. But he accepted it, see. He didn't push back and say, well, you know, you're my son and I'm the one that does all, you know, he realized that man to man, I was right, he was wrong, you know. And how old was I? 45 years old? It's like, I'm a 45-year-old telling a 65-year-old to quit being a bitch. And the 65-year-old raised the 45-year-old. And the only thing I was ever told at the level of being a man was suck it up, don't be a pussy. That was the answer to everything. Suck it up, don't be a pussy. That's it. Do whatever else you want. Follow the minimum amount of rules. And if you start crying and whining, somebody going to tell you to suck it up, don't be a pussy. So now there I was all those years later telling that to my dad. You know, crazy. This is society. This is what society has become. And it's certainly the influence of women. You know, my father allowed women to influence his thinking and to psychologically do a fucking number on his psychology and his psyche and turned him into that temporarily. And I had to help him get out of that. Or I chose to, rather. Hey, knock it the fuck off, man. Yeah. So I sort of got a little too personal there, perhaps. And but yeah, and so this is back to what the younger generations, you know, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, are now starting to realize, especially Gen Z, that they just simply never experienced this. You know, they never experienced the terrifying father, right? Who they might themselves have to square off with out in the front yard one day. You know, their gigantic, scary father, just to get him up off, just to, you know, might have to be willing to potentially fight to the death just to get this gorilla up off of you, and you weigh 130 pounds, 5 foot back then, 5'8", 130 pounds probably, and it's like, well, this motherfucker's 6'2", goes about 260. Well, back then would have went about 230. But fuck it, this aggression will not stand. This motherfucker's gonna have to kill me because I can't live this way. See, well, Americans will live any type of way they're made to live. See, so what was it about a 15-year-old Benton, right, to where he planted his feet and stood up to that motherfucker and said, "Listen, man, I'm done with this. You're not going to do this to me anymore," right? And again, the guy could have physically thrown me across the front yard. He could have grabbed me and thrown me. He had me up against the side of the house. He could have just thrown me up against the fucking house and I would have been completely defenseless. Nothing I could have done. But in my mind, he was going to have to kill me, right? And he wasn't willing to take it to those levels. And I imposed my will on that man at the age of 15. This is what I'm talking about. That this and more is what Gen Z is starting to realize that they simply missed out on in a lot of the millennials. And then the person is then transformed as a result. See, that's some level of intestinal fortitude, some level of mental strength is transferred or imbued into the individual as a result. So part of the reason I can't go to a Whole Foods and do my shopping, because Jeff Bezos, in his infinite wisdom, has figured out, well, let's not allow grocery items to be sent to an Amazon locker anymore because now we own Whole Foods. Let's only allow grocery items to be sent to the Amazon counter inside of a Whole Foods, because then once they're in Whole Foods, they will probably shop for other things. Well, I can't go into a Whole Foods and shop because when I plant my feet and start looking at the products, a woman magically appears to my right, never to my left, interestingly. A woman just poof, as if she never existed in the past, as if she's just now coming into existence in the world. Just there she is. Poof. There's a woman right next to me. And it reminds me of something. There's someone who used to participate in the channel over here called Bex. And I've heard her talk numerous times about when she was a younger gal, you know, probably in her 20s. And she would talk about how it felt to just sort of be in the presence of an attractive man, a man she found attractive. And she talked about how, you know, intoxicating that feeling was, right? Whatever that is that a woman gets out of that. You know, and I imagine it's much the same. It's not that there's nothing special about Benton other than he gave up 100 pounds and 4 inches of height to his gigantic, scary father, who absolutely could have I would have been helpless if we'd actually got into it. There's no version of me winning the fucking fist fight. Zero version, right? But I wasn't going to stop. See, and if he'd have kicked my ass, the exact same thing would have been an issue the next day. And it would have been an issue the day after that. Like, seriously, he would have had to beat it out of me. And he's not willing to do that. And that's Gandhian nonviolence. I don't know if y'all realize that. And so this probably shows something about the spiritual shit that Benton was on, even at the age of 15. When they talk about Gandhian nonviolence is violence. It's to only take the violence and to never dish the violence out. And believe me, I would have been taking the violence in that scenario. I would not have been dishing it out. Okay. No way, no how. It would have been him, right? And so, if you look at Gandhi and the Salt March and all of this, you know, and India winning its independence from Great Britain at the official fiction layer, it was Gandhi and his followers standing up to the British troops, and it's just more or less like, we're going to stand here, and then the British troops are going to be ordered to bash us in the head, to bash the Gandhi's followers in the head with big sticks. And then so the first line gets hit in the head and falls out, and Gandhi has everybody organized so that as soon as they fall out, another line steps forward, another line of people steps forward and takes their place, and they get clubbed in the head. And so the strategy is eventually the clubbers, the British troops, and in fact, a lot of these may have actually been their own countrymen. Now that I think about it, I'm not an expert in history. Some of these may have actually been Indian people, who knows? But either way, at some point, the human beings are going to have enough of hitting other human beings in the head, and a seemingly inexhaustible supply of people are moving forward, right? Well, at some point, the people working for the government are no longer going to be willing to crack these skulls. Well, same thing with my dad. If he had cracked my skull day one, well, he's going to have to do it the next time, because I never would have stopped. That's commitment, right? Where is the commitment on behalf of individuals, on their own behalf? Where is their commitment within themselves? What are they committed to within themselves? Because I committed myself to this spiritual path 15 fucking years ago and have worked towards it on a daily basis. That's called commitment, and have rededicated myself and have recommitted myself, but not for an external reward, because it's worth doing, because it needs to be done. Again, be the change you want to see in the world. Okay, you bet. Time to go inside and figure out what the fuck is going on in there and pull oneself up by one's own bootstraps, mind, body, and spirit within oneself. I don't see anybody doing that. I see a lot of people claiming to do that. I see people making a vocation and making a business of seeming to do that, right? And leading other people into, into externalities, right? So what's there to be done about all of this? Realistically speaking, what is there to be done about all of this? Well, nothing externally. There's nothing to be done externally that can have any effect whatsoever, right? Because the people have no power outside of their own sphere of influence, which is their own energy, their own energy sphere, or their own being. And what does the system say? Power to the people, strength in numbers. Bullshit. Inverted world. It's the opposite. The people collectively outside of themselves have no power. There is no strength in numbers. It's the opposite. One of the best ways to get in all sorts of trouble is to hang out in crowds. Right. That's a big way to get in all sorts of trouble. Absolutely. Hanging out in a crowd. Right. Anyway, I feel I'm getting a little too worked up, but some of this is, again, the, more and more healing in the name of Jesus. And as the hanging from the pull-up bar, a certain type of active hanging, 2 to 3 times a day. And yesterday evening, I really got in there. If y'all have ever seen like a pull-up bar that has a close grip, it's got the 2 individual close grips, and the person can actually do like a sternum pull-up. They can pull themselves up. Instead of a regular pull-up, they're doing a pull-up, with a neutral grip, and then they don't touch their chin. They pull their chest up or their sternum up, as close as they can to those 2 bars, and they squeeze and hold.
Well, I do that, but with a straight bar, but I only do it like with my upper, like my mid back, upper back, and my scapular region, if that makes sense. So my sternum can't physically touch the bar, but so I pull, you know, uh, to varying pressures. So yesterday was a good day of really being able to pull hard on that second pull. And, and also when I did the last 20 minutes of the stream yesterday, when I got off stream, my physicality, my tissues, my, thoracic spine region, I was having a tingling. I was having a reaction in an area it's lower than normal. And that I said, okay, there must be something associated with this diatribe. And it wasn't a diatribe, but, whatever that I was discoursing about with respect to that one particular individual near the end of yesterday's stream, you know, that's part of the healing, right? Is that something stagnated was already in my body or my energy sphere, and now it's able to be experienced and released. Well, same thing's happening with me talking about these topics. Some of that is getting stirred up in conjunction with the physical movements. And this is one of many things. I've been working towards fixing my shoulder and my back for years now. And I told my mom, I remember telling my mother like over 5 years ago that I said, well, if I live long enough, I will fix this shoulder problem. And it used to be visible. I used to visibly have like one normal looking shoulder, and then the other one was all like sunken in, and it was like way less. Not that I have broad shoulders, but it's like way narrower than the other one. And that's, almost entirely resolved, not completely. And there's been a great deal of healing. So shout out to the Lord Christ Jesus for the continued healing. Appreciate you. I see you working, Padna. I see you working, Padna. And maybe that's why I've never felt alone, right? Because old Benton here has been guided and protected spiritually his entire life, right? And people can have their own opinions. This idea of everybody having 4 guardian angels, that seems right to me. And I've certainly been aware of some sort of divine intervention, or too many things have occurred, right? Just there's too many phenomena have happened that are not necessarily unexplainable, but it's just like after the thing happens, I'm like, yeah, that was definitely, I was spiritually guided and protected, such as the fella who, I somehow managed to leave my debit card in the Walmart. The guy chased me down into the parking lot, even though I had my earbuds in, and I thought it was just some weirdo who wanted to talk to me. And he could have just been like, well, fuck it. If this bozo isn't going to, if he's just going to keep walking away, fuck him. Right. I'll just go turn it into the Walmart, and then maybe it'll be here. Maybe he'll come back for it. Maybe he won't. Right. And many things like that. And I was like, oh, my bad. I didn't realize what was going on. And then when he handed me my card, I was like, wow, that would have been a disaster. To have lost that card at that time. Would not have been able to replace it, certainly, the way I'm living. And just many other times, many other things like that. Like, as I was just checked into a motel, go back to my car, look down, I see a fucking nail in my tire. And I look up, oh, look, Mexican used tire place across the street. Drive over there. $30 with tip later, and old Benton's got his, and I could have been on the freeway, and the damn thing could have blowed up or whatever, right? Just so many things like that I've lost track, right? So many things. And they say, well, you think you're special. No, what I am is always special. It's so special that an entire delusory realm involved with waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, has emerged in opposition to what I am. Is that special enough for you? Is that special enough for you? Again, not who I am at the level of a targeted individual, what I am. Again, what we talked about yesterday with the John chapter 15, I believe it was, around, you didn't, Jesus talking, saying, you haven't chosen me, I've chosen you out of the world. See? And probably I was chosen for whatever reason, if that's a thing. And I'm not saying that it was. See? I'm not saying that it's a thing. I'm saying that if that's a thing to be chosen, perhaps everybody is chosen and called out to, and either can't hear the call or don't listen. But back to the commitment, many years ago, in my own existential crisis or just my own personal problems, I've said it before, nobody's homeless for 10 or more years for no fucking reason. And, I'm not a drug addict and never been in the mental health system and all of these things. So, I was clearly working and dealing with something back then. And hang on a second. Thought we might have picked up a hitchhiker. Maybe not. I detected someone might be listening a little too intently, starting to relate to what I was saying here in the physical, in the IRL. So I don't even know what I was saying, allowing myself to be interrupted by that. What time is it? 7 o'clock. Coming up on 2 hours, so yeah. Land the plane. Anyway, anybody that's listened to me for any period of time probably already knows whatever points I was trying to make there. So give me a moment. I'll tie this in, hopefully. So it took me a while, but Benton here has fully accepted that there are no solutions whatsoever. And remember, all current social problems in America that are not directly related to, technology, right? As far as, smartphones and AI and all of this, all current social problems were fully fomented by 1960, 15 years before I was born, but then still clinging to the hope and being psychologically controlled and indoctrinated that the government and the various systems of man are addressing the issues and eventually they're going to figure it out. No, that's what's creating the issues. The political system, the corporate system, the banking system, all of these systems, the medical system, they have created, or more correctly, the people have allowed them to create the conditions whereby by 1960, all of these social problems were fully enmeshed, fully present in society by 1960. So 65 years of not solving it. And the answer to everything is, oh, well, wait till once this president's gone. Yeah, once this president's gone, the government is still not going to fix the social problems because the government is creating the social problems in conjunction with all of these various other entities. So, oh, you mean the thing that's creating the problems, that's what's being looked to solve the problems? What sense does that make? Well, it's because the individual will do almost anything other than expose themselves to whatever darkness and disgusting, depraved, the so-called shadow self, whatever's going on within them that they don't have the courage to face, right? And one of which that I've recognized in the so-called truth community is off the charts levels of repressed homosexuality. How in the world is a fella going to go and truly and honestly examine his internal space while, in some way probably understanding that he might discover the repressed homosexuality that's in there, right? A fella from middle America, how's that going to happen? A person who may have been socialized in a very repressive environment, right? Well, okay, well, that's off the table. That's off the table, right? And how many versions of undesirable traits and characteristics that exist within the individual. Now, a lot of people will acknowledge their surface level flaws, the flaws that show at the surface level, and this, oh, well, we've all got our flaws, and people now making a sport of making their identity, whatever they're afflicted with, oh, I've got anxiety, I've got bipolar, or I shouldn't even say that, people saying that they have bipolar or this or that or the other. That's all surface level at this point, right? I'm talking about the individual developing the ability to direct their focus and concentration inwardly and meditatively to discover what in the fuck is going on in here. And who is this person? And I had to figure out quick, fast, in a hurry, what motivates this guy? What's he all about? What does he respond to? What is he repulsed by? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? What does he believe? Why does he believe it? Do these beliefs serve him? If not, who do they serve? Oh, well, it turns out these were mostly programmed beliefs, right? Or a bit of belief from the Jehovah's Witness programming, a bit of a belief from the whatever the TV did. Some of it comes from the local, the local culture, whatever the family did. See, how many people have honestly examined their own belief systems? And I'm talking about in a detailed, systematic way, and to then observe over time, okay, how has this belief served me? How has it served other people? And then recognizing, okay, I have the opportunity to no longer subscribe to these belief systems, and I have an opportunity to replace them with a belief system of my choosing, right? I did that 15 years ago, maybe longer, right? And it's not about Benton, oh, Benton's great and we suck. That's not it. It's procrastination has no end either. Procrastination has no end. I saw procrastination before any of these before any of this spiritual growth ever happened, because in my 20s, I was one of the most horrific, in my teens and 20s, into my 20s, I was one of the worst procrastinators you could ever imagine. I tried to get out of everything possible. I tried to put everything off. I was avoidant of all sorts of things until I finally figured out that if I'm not able to avoid a particular task, that it's more painful to go through all of the stress, the fear, the anxiety, the loathing, and the dreading of the task, only to still do the task in the end. It's actually easier to do the task as quickly as possible and to skip the fear, the anxiety, the trepidation, the loathing, and all of that. It was a strategy, and I taught myself not to procrastinate. And so we already have people who default to procrastination, right? Well, how in the world are they ever going to examine their own belief systems when the default is to go to procrastination? So it's like, oh yeah, Benton has inspired us to go examine our belief systems. Okay, well, let's go externally and let's go see what the peer group thinks about it. Let's go externally into social media. Let's see what other people examining their belief systems. If so, how are they doing it? What does it look like? They already want a framework for how is this going to look? How is this going to express? Am I going to come across as a weirdo? Am I going to be accepted by my peer groups? I didn't consider any of that. I fucking swept that to the side and I just did the damn thing. Right? Why am I able to do that and other people aren't? See? And I would say anybody can do that, but not without courage, not without being willing to be found out by the peer group, right? And not needing to go find out, well, where are the other people that are have recently examined their own belief systems? I need to join a support group. I need support. Well, anybody that needs support is fucked. If you need support, you're fucked. Meaning external support. Support is internal. Support is tapping into what I am and expressing it and bringing it forth. Because remember, what I am is abundance. There's no possibility of lacking anything whatsoever. Wanting to go and do these things externally, right, it's a recognition that the individual lacks courage, lacks intestinal fortitude. Well, guess what? There's only one way to get that stuff if it's lacking, is to just do the damn thing without support. There's no support for that. And in fact, any support that's sought is what is the support going to do? The external support is going to common sense, conventional wisdom, and word of mouth everything for their own dismissive purposes. They just want their friend behaving as they expect their friend to behave. They don't want to hear all this about belief systems, and they don't want to hear it, right? So the moment other people are involved, the moment the individual realizes that they're going outside of themselves and seeking to involve all of these other mechanisms and organizations and individuals, that's a mistake. That's a strategic error. Now, if individuals actually were willing to undertake these processes and then began to do these things, then Benton might have a function to serve, because then Benton could be available for people with specific questions to say, hey, I've been working on this particular area and I'm hitting a dead end here. Do you have any thoughts on this? And I will helpfully give them tips, hints, and tricks to deal with whatever they're dealing with, and perhaps even foresee potential obstacles in the near future, right? But again, back to the isolation, back to people being disconnected, disenfranchised. There's no possibility of that, because that must occur through support. It has to occur through peer groups. The humans need to see other people doing that. And the fact that no individual is willing to do it until they individually see other people doing it, who's going to be the first one to do it? Oh, well, there's Benton over there, that weirdo oddball with this strange manner. He claims to have done it, but, well, he's not really accepted, and it's too easy to mock and ridicule him, so that's not going to do it, right? And that is the human condition. Thanks for watching or listening. Bye.